Welcome to all attendees and panelists to this session on improving enforcement of regulation at all levels to accelerate progress, one of the central subjects of the Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment. I'm Simran Singh, and I'm from the ILO, based in Sri Lanka, covering Sri Lanka and Maldives. And joining me here as a co-moderator is Celine Lamel of the International Organization of Migration, with whom we closely coordinate in the implementation of our respective initiatives to promote fair and ethical recruitment. Our objective for this session is to hear from practitioners from the Labor Inspectorate and licensing authorities, their perspective on specific recruitment-related enforcement gaps and emerging practices to address them in different contexts. To complement government perspective on this subject, a worker representative will reflect further on identified gaps and highlight the role of workers' organizations advocating and contributing to improved regulations and in monitoring and supporting effective enforcement measures. We look forward to hearing from the practitioners today, discuss how they can be put in practice on the ground and how we can learn from one another to foster greater progress. So before I begin to introduce, together with my co-moderator, our distinguished panelists, I'm going to launch a live poll to start the conversation and set the scene. As mentioned, while the need for effective enforcement is undeniable, we also recognize the challenges this entails, especially when it comes to cross-border recruitment. Before we start, let's hear from the audience, please, and ask your views on what you see as the main challenges when it comes to enforcement of recruitment regulations. The live poll will go there. 3 key challenges. If you can identify 3 key challenges to effective enforcement of recruitment regulation, and please send in just a 1 or 2 word maximum answer to that question per challenge. Again, the question is, what are the 3 key challenges to effective enforcement of recruitment regulation? And just 2 words in your answer. Please answer in the poll. Wow, that's a lot. Convention 181 of the ILO, capacity issues, political will, of course, accountability, recruitment fees, for sure, the complexity of what we're trying to endeavor to do, and insufficient resources. Wow, those are very, very inequalities. Accountability, regulations that are too complex. Government capacity, inequalities between countries, recruitment fees, again, complexity of regulations, capacity issues, different standards, communication, application of the law, migration and security, different laws, yes, again, laws and countries of destination versus countries of origin. All right, I think those are quite good. So I think that should really help the speakers also frame their inputs once they get going. Thank you so much for your rich contribution, and they will be discussed, I'm sure. I'm going to hand over now to my co-moderator, Celine, from IOM, for the introduction of the panel. Over to you, Celine.
Thank you very much, Simran. Today, Simran and myself have the honor and pleasure to welcome the following 4 distinguished panelists. Daryl Dixon from the government of UK is responsible for the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority's future strategy, encompassing development of new powers, regulatory and innovative enforcement approaches, the development of a single enforcement body and international exchange agreement supporting cross-border operations. Also with us, Teresa Pargana has been the head of unit at the Authority for Working Conditions, Government of Portugal since 2007. She has been a labor inspector since 1996. She is responsible for preparation of internal orders, guidance about labor legislation to Authority for Working Conditions local branches, Labor Code and OSH, decent work, non-discrimination, migrant worker, etc. Joining with this panel as well, Edith Okoki, Acting Director General at the National Employment Authority with the Government of Kenya. The NEA is responsible for implementing employment policies, programs, and strategies, including enforcing regulations of private employment agencies. And finally, Matt Cray, Workers' Representative, is a Trades Union Congress Employment Rights Policy Officer covering labor market enforcement, employment, tribunal fees, and family-friendly rights. Thank you all for joining us today and taking part in this panel. So without further ado, Daryl, please tell us, so GLA sets licensing conditions for private recruitment agencies. Could you please give us an example of how you enforce those conditions? And can you please tell us what are the greatest challenges in enforcing adherence to those licensing conditions?
Excuse me. Certainly, yes. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today at this conference. The Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority is in part a licensing body, but it only licenses those businesses that provide temporary labour in the UK into the agricultural sector primarily, and some related activity in processing and packaging food, and also shellfish, a smaller part of our business. So we don't license the activities of labour providers, as we call them, employment agencies that may be providing workers temporarily into other industry sectors like hospitality, construction, care homes, and the like. To enforce the sector that we do deal with, the agricultural sector, we introduced our licensing standards. And the licensing standards set out for any company that needs to hold a license all those parts of UK legislation that they need to comply with to hold a license and then maintain that license. In the UK, there are different inspectorates that deal with different things like health and safety or national minimum wage. But in the sector that we license, we use the licensing standards as our framework for our inspectors to assess a business to see whether it is compliant across a range of pieces of legislation. So in relation to their tax compliance, payment of national minimum wage to workers, health and safety, that the contract they've given to workers is not deceptive or has hidden fees within it. And we also assess whether the way in which the workers are treated might be considered to be forced labour, using the ILO's forced labour indicators as the benchmark for that assessment. So that's the framework. When we receive an application from a business, we check out the applicant and the business with other government departments in the UK to see if they hold any information on that business, on that individual, to see whether there are any records that suggest that they've been irregularities or offences committed by the business or the individual running the business, which might mean that we would consider the business not fit and proper to hold a licence. If we refuse a licence, the company can't operate legally, and if they did, it commits a criminal offence which we'd investigate. So that information we get from the other government departments helps us in terms of assessing the risk in that case and what we might need to do in terms of an inspection of the business. In most cases, a new applicant for a licence is inspected by our inspectors against those licensing standards to first-hand identify whether the business is operating in a compliant manner. That's our framework. If a business is compliant, they get a licence. If they subsequently become non-compliant and we receive information of that, then we take action to review the licence and revoke the licence if that's the case. In terms of the challenges, one of those challenges is always the fact that we need to ensure we get reliable information that indicates whether we need to re-inspect a business if it is becoming non-compliant and maybe exploiting workers up to the level of forced labour, where that can be a criminal offence in the UK. So we receive information from a range of different bodies, charities, trade unions, workers themselves and other businesses. And it's important there, challenges is to make sure that people are aware of their rights and that they know when those rights have been infringed, and that businesses help to make sure those rights aren't infringed and report that to us. Another major challenge for us is making sure that where the business has recruited its workers via a third-party organisation outside the UK, that we can effectively assess whether that business, the one outside the UK, is operating in a way that we would be happy with and not exploiting those workers as they're recruited, and that other business is compliant with the labour laws in the country where they're based. And that can be quite complex for us, where we are having to try and locate, identify and liaise with labour inspectorates in other countries.
Thank you very much, Daryl. I will get back to you in a minute with a follow-up question. But before that, let me turn to Edith. So, Edith, we just heard from the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority on the licensing conditions they impose on agencies and on the challenges in enforcing them. From a country of origin perspective, are you regulating recruitment agencies in a similar way?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Yes, we are regulating private employment agencies. What we have is that we have a form in which they make an application if they're interested in doing recruitment. And we also have a fee that we charge. And this fee, we also, apart from that, we also keep records of all employment agencies. And this information can also be easily accessed from our website. And the reason why we do this is so that the citizens are not gullible and they'll be able to trace these recruitment agencies. And for us to do this, before we give somebody a certificate, we look at the qualifications of the proprietor or the people who are running that agency. And the nature, what we look for is the nature and the form of the security to be given by the proprietor of the employment agency for any recruitment of employees under the law. And we also ensure that all the jobs that they advertise, we have been able to verify, because there have been instances where jobs have been advertised for jobs that do not exist. The other way that we also ensure that these recruitment agencies are doing the right work is that we do inspect their facilities, the premises where they are conducting their business. And before we do that, there's a committee that is multi-agency in nature, and the National Employment Authority acts as the secretariat. And this authority then will be able to look at all the applications that have been brought in by the private recruitment agencies. And we normally do a background check of the recruitment agency so that we can know the past dealings. And this is done by the relevant arm of government. And we also insist on them having clearance from the criminal agency, investigative agency. And this also will help us to be able to look at all the actions that they may have been done that had maybe a threat to the national security. After that, this application is taken to the vetting committee, as I've mentioned. And the vetting committee then looks at it in terms of what I've already mentioned in terms of the security and the past dealings. And this authority then is the secretariat, the vetting committee, is able then to issue a certificate. But that does not mean that the monitoring of the agencies will stop there. In case they are found to have broken any law, then we can reject that certificate, but they also have their right to appeal. And as I've mentioned, all the recruitment agencies that have already been given certification by the authority are posted in the website for ease of access by the citizens. We are also trying to ensure that they have they're able to regulate themselves. And so we have encouraged them to form associations that will then be able to regulate their own activities. And so before you can even be given a certificate by the authority, you must be a member of an association. Yes, we do have some challenges. And the challenges we are having are in terms of monitoring of these recruitment agencies. We have human resource and capital shortages. So at times, monitoring becomes a challenge. We also do not have adequate legal framework, and that is what we are now working on. As you may realize, this is something that has been in the market before government came in. Everybody had their free play, but in the last 10 years or so is when government has come in, and so a lot of regulations is now being worked on. And I think those are some of the challenges that we encounter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edith, and especially for also mentioning the kind of enforcement challenges you are facing. So just a quick follow-up question to both of you. Are you cooperating with regulatory agencies in countries of origin and destination, respectively? So perhaps Daryl?
Yes. The situation in the UK has changed quite a bit, obviously, recently. For those of you who keep up on these things, you'll know that we were a member of the European Union, and we're not a member of the European Union now. When the European Union expanded with the accession states, the East European countries that joined, such as Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and others, that did lead to an increase in migration to the UK of workers who were entitled freedom of movement to come to the UK, were legal migrants to come to the UK and seek employment. Now, as time went by, some of those workers didn't come over just easily, simply themselves, but were recruited by businesses in those other EU states. And therefore, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key risks for us was trying to assess whether the way in which they were recruited was compliant with our own standards and was compliant with the domestic legislation. A good example was that quite a number of countries had brought in legislation that prevented work finding fees. For a while, Romania was behind that. So we had to make sure that although they could charge work finding fees, they didn't do before they also aligned their legislation to prevent that issue occurring. And so we've worked quite closely to build the relationship with the other EU labour inspectorates and the police through a range of activities we were doing directly with the inspectorates as problems arose, but then more latterly with some work that we were asked to initiate with our colleagues in the National Crime Agency through Europol and with our Dutch counterparts to lead on a programme that brought together annually the labour inspectors and the police forces of the EU nations and to intensify activity against forced labour as a regular basis. And what that was really doing as well was trying to encourage and look for those cases where there were cross-border recruitment issues and deceptive recruitment. And that, of course, is now going to be taken up by the liaison between Europol and the new European Labour Authority. So we were also instrumental in providing the support to the EU in its toolkit for other nations in the EU on how to set up bilateral agreements on collaboration and looking at each country's powers and how they could cooperate on any cross-border recruitment irregularities.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And Edith, how about you on your side and the National Employment Authority? Yes,
we work very closely with our partners. We share the list of all the agencies that we've been able to give accreditation. Other than that, we also have BLAs with the destination countries. And in the BLAs, we have spelled out responsibilities for the recruitment agencies. And so that, and through our regular meetings, we are able to make all those follow-ups. We have also sent labor attaches to the countries where we take a lot of our labor to work. So that is the three ways in which we collaborate closely with the countries of destination.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. I'll hand over to Simreen for the next questions.
Thank you. And I would like to now perhaps direct a question to our female labor inspector, Ms. Teresa Pangaro from Portugal. Teresa, I was just wondering, as a labor inspector, you are at the forefront of enforcement of recruitment regulations. So what kind of proactive and reactive action can you take to prevent and tackle fraudulent recruitment practices? What are the challenges you face? Please, over to you, Teresa.
Okay, hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our experience with you. So, Authority for Working Conditions is responsible in Portugal to ensure the compliance of the labor regulations, specifically related with the recruitment process, and also and safety and health legislation. So we have an important role in the world of work because we have this challenge how to ensure the compliance of the law. And we have many expectations from workers in this field of recruitment process, that we have many irregularities that have been mentioned. We have expectations from governments, from trade unions, civil society. So it is a very important role. So how we do that? We do that according to ILO conventions. We develop information, cooperation, and control at the workplaces. So these are the methodologies that we use in order to achieve the compliance of the law. In Portugal, some words about our regulatory framework that we have to control. Private employment agencies don't need a license or an authorization. They just need to make a communication to the employment service with a set of requirements, of course. We have a regulatory framework. I think it's a very good one because as a set of rights to workers, a set of obligations to agencies. So I think the main issue here in Portugal, it's not the regulatory framework. The issue here, the challenge here is inform, cooperate, and control at the workplaces. We develop information. We develop information by ourselves in our website, in our local branches. We develop also guidance, checklists, training for labor inspectors, and also we cooperate with other institutions that has competences in this field of recruitment process. We give information also by telephone. We have a telephone translation service. We produce leaflets, and the main challenge here, it's not only elaborate these leaflets in cooperation with our other actors. The challenge here is to be where workers are. Try to, that this kind of information can achieve the workers. This is very important, achieve the workers, the recruitments, the employers, and we try to do that. We try to, as I said, to develop information in our website, with other institutions in Portugal and transnational also. But the main challenge here is provide this information to the workers, to the job applicants. This is a big challenge that we have. We have developed in order to achieve this goal of give information. We have developed awareness campaigns. We have repeated campaigns about the more information workers have before leaving the country, the less will be vulnerable. We have also bilateral protocols, as been mentioned. Also, I think it's very important because we can give our contributions in order to simplify the process and give information about the rights and the duties and the focal points. So I think it's very important to have these bilateral protocols in order to exchange information, and we are develop this kind of methodology. Of course, we have the control at the workplaces, and here I think labor inspector has a huge challenge because and a very important one, because we can go to the workplaces without any prior notice. We can interrogate the employers, we can give informations, and we can inform also the employers about what they need to do. And we aren't policies, so we are a social inspection. We try to solve the problems of the workers. We try to inform, and of course we have sanctions because we need this part. Of course, we prefer that the accomplice of the law in order to promote better working conditions. But of course, we have also sanctions. We have sanctions related to integrity of the activity in the case of the agency charge fees to the workers. It's a very severe infraction in Portugal because this is a problem that we have, and we think that the majority of the countries has also. It's very frequent, this kind of irregularity. So we have sanctions that we apply fines. We give publicity to that sanctions. When we have facts that can constitute a crime, we communicate to the public prosecutor, and we have, in some cases, we have also civil liability, joint responsibility for those involved. So I think the main challenge here is reinforce information, ensure that the information is where it's needed, near the employers, and reinforce cooperation at a national level, at an international level too. Just one aspect related with this pandemic crisis that we live, the majority of announcements are in the internet, and it's necessary to fill forms, and they disappear one day, and another day we don't have any kind of information, and it's very difficult to labor inspectors can control this kind of activity because it's a hidden, and sometimes we need to undercover fill forms online in order to know where the intermediation it's going to happen. So this kind of procedure that we have, it's a challenge. In Portugal, we are discussing in this moment some regulation about this, the work that is through the internet. So I think if you want that I explain any aspect, please tell me. Thank you very much.
to hear that you have a really solid regulatory framework in Portugal, and that your efforts really need to be on the information, getting the information out, but also that you have pretty severe penalties for violations, and that's also a very good aspect. But certainly, digital challenges remain. So I'm going to move on now to last but not least our trade union counterpart from the Trade Union Congress of the UK, Matt Cray. Matt, we've heard about what the government has been doing in terms of regulating and enforcement efforts, but we know that migrant workers are very often concentrated in hidden areas and sectors where it's hard to monitor and certainly hard to reach and inspect. So knowing these challenges that have been identified already, what role can unions play to support and contribute to effective monitoring of regulations? What can be done more of and better of? Over to you, Matt.
Thanks. Good to be here, and hello to everybody. So I just wanted to start off quickly by just saying what have unions done for migrant workers, and I think I'd like to pick up two key things. So firstly, we've made sure that migrant workers have a greater awareness of their employment rights. So the TUC has translated a range of employment rights materials into about 20 different languages and created a specific website for migrant workers. So firstly, they can understand what their rights are, the core workplace rights. But most importantly, what unions have done is to help migrant workers organise and negotiate. So we've seen good examples during the pandemic in the meat processing sector, where migrant agency workers have been really susceptible to exploitation. So there have been examples where agency workers have had to work in really sort of disgusting conditions, squalid toilet facilities, no soap or hand towels, generally quite dirty environments, living in cramped housing, social distancing regulations not being adhered to in the factories, and infection tracking procedures not being applied properly for the agency workers. So the union there was able to step in, help organise the workers and represent their interests to the employer. So I think that's the key thing that unions can do. We actually regulate the employment relationship in the workplaces directly. What we're campaigning for, we'd like greater union access to workplaces. So we'd like a right for unions to go into workplaces and to speak with workers and let them know what unions can do for them. We'd like greater collective bargaining rights across sectors. So we could raise standards, for example, in exploitative industries by setting a floor of decent standards. And perhaps an innovative idea going forward would be to have tripartite labour market inspections, where unions, employer representatives and enforcement agencies visit workplaces where exploitation is rife and actually speak to workers there. And we feel that unions would be well placed to speak with workers. We're trusted, and workers would be able to tell us what the real issues they're facing and what help they need. And I think one of the questions I was asked is what could be done more and better. We're looking at the UK context. I think, frankly, we need greater resources for the enforcement body. Two key facts jump out at me. Firstly, before the pandemic, up to 500,000 people weren't getting paid the correct national minimum wage rate. So that's quite a shocking amount of people not getting the basic workplace rights. And in the UK, we have roughly 30,000 recruitment agencies, and the regulator responsible for that sector actually only has 18 inspectors. So there's no way that they can do a proper, robust job there with the limited resources they have. The ILO has set a benchmark saying that there should be one inspector for every 10,000 workers. If that was the case, the UK would need roughly 3,300 inspectors, but we currently only have 1,500. So we need roughly another 1,800 labour market inspectors to make sure we're adequately resourced. And then two further things I'd quickly like to mention. We think there should be a firewall between immigration enforcement and labour market enforcement. What happens too often in the UK is there are joint investigations which mean that workers are often scared of raising labour market issues because they fear that they'll be reported to immigration enforcement. And finally, we think joint and several liability in supply chains would be a valuable labour market enforcement tool. And what that would mean in practical terms is that a worker in a supply chain who wasn't getting paid the national minimum wage would be able to bring a claim against any contractor in the supply chain to remedy that situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Very succinct and to the point, the 3 points of where improvements need to be. Certainly a larger labor inspectorate would be very important, but also engagement, especially the point you made about tripartite committees. I think that's very useful suggestion in terms of getting the different perspectives and actually reaching the workers effectively, especially those that might be vulnerable to this form of exploitation at the recruitment stage. Thank you, Matt. So I think now we're moving on to the next and final segment of our panel and our session here, which is basically over to you all in the audience. This is your opportunity to ask questions of any of the four panelists over here. And I understand some questions have been coming up. So I will go ahead and perhaps reach out to meet those questions and address them to the panelists. So give me a moment to see how I can. So I will share the questions to the different speakers as they come. So here's one for Matt, and it's from Pakistan, Matt, from Sadia. Sadia asks, usually policies, laws governing recruitment look very good on or compliant, but in practice, they are not in place. What to do to make sure they are implemented with a true spirit, any monitoring on implementation and what to do? So Matt, that's one question. And while you give some thought and reflection to that, maybe I can pose one more question for Teresa so she can prepare. Teresa, there's a question from Gianni Rosas for Teresa, or actually Daryl, any one of you. Is there any example of enforcement and monitoring of private intermediation through digital platforms? Teresa, Daryl, if you can give some reflection on that, but over to you, Matt, in the meantime, if you can answer Sadia's question. Sure.
So I think if I understood the question correctly, you're saying how do we make sure that recruitment agencies actually follow the laws that are set out? So I think there are three ways we can do that. And Daryl from the UK GLAA will be well placed to talk about this as well. But I think the licensing scheme, which is operated by the GLAA, is a good way of making sure that regulations are complied with. Because why the unions support the licensing system is because before somebody can operate in that sector, they have to prove that they meet those licensing requirements and that they're adhering to existing standards. So it's a good way of checking before somebody starts operating a business that they're complying with the licensing standards. So we'd like to see licensing extended to other sectors where there's exploitation, such as cleaning, hospitality, social care, construction, for example. I think also, as I mentioned in what I said earlier, having union access, giving unions a legal right to access workplaces is a good way of making sure that recruitment agencies and other labour market intermediaries are complying with the law, because unions could go in and actually check and speak to workers and have a legal right to do so. So I think they're two key things we could do. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Daryl or Teresa?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on one point that Matt said. Obviously, there have been calls before for licensing to be extended in the UK, and I expect that will continue. There is exploitation that we identify in other sectors, but we don't have that ability at the moment to license it. We do have wider police powers which help us. I think it's important that if we don't have a licensing framework, that a body such as ourselves does have the powers to get access to other premises to inspect them where we consider that there is instances of forced labour. And in that regard, we're quite successful that we have that approach and powers similar to our colleagues that operate a similar approach both in the Netherlands and Belgium, where they don't license, but they do have that inspectorate power and the power to investigate the forced labour. And moving on from that to the second question that was to Teresa and myself in terms of online platforms, we do see an increase in recruitment of workers from adverts on Facebook and other social media. It is obviously difficult trying to find out which jurisdiction that advert is being mounted from in the first place. I did mention a while back a case of the Romanian law being sort of catching up with Bulgarian law and others in terms of not charging work finding fees. And it was a good example because the Romanian company had offices in Bulgaria to recruit Bulgarian workers to come to the UK. But if it had recruited the workers from its Bulgarian office, it would have had to comply with Bulgarian law and not charge work finding fees. Instead, it recruited the Bulgarian workers directly from Romania via its online platform, which was situated in Romania, and therefore it felt it could charge work finding fees. So the jurisdiction where the online platform is can cause difficulties for us if it is outside of the receiving jurisdiction, and we have difficulty trying to trace it. One of the things that we did do was we raised this as part of one of our Europol action plan years for colleagues in other countries to focus on this as much as possible. But also, most recently, we ran a program with colleagues in a charity, Crime Stoppers, for reporting all sorts of crimes that people might encounter and experience. But we ran a program with them where they assisted in some micro-targeting through Facebook, where the targeting was aimed at particular parts of the country where we knew there was an increased level of Romanian migrant labour, and therefore targeted sort of like the catchment of those Romanian workers between about 25 to 35 based on their profile to generate adverts that they might find in their Facebook feeds that suggested perhaps employment opportunities, which actually, when they clicked on it, took them to another site which said, these are the things you need to be aware of when you are being recruited to watch out for, so that you don't find yourself in an exploitative situation, particularly where you are entering into a recruitment which you are agreeing to through an online platform.
Thank you, Daryl. Teresa, do you want to come in now, or can I shoot another question for you?
I prefer comment now. Yes, I subscribe the words of Daryl because we have the same problem. We have announcements at the internet. Some of them charge fees, sometimes small amounts, and in the other day they disappear. So we have dozens of workers paying these fees, and as I said, in the other day we don't have any information about them. It's a challenge for her, for us, can control this. In this case, we have our powers, and when it is necessary to investigate this kind of situations, we communicate to the police because they have specific powers to investigate, and this can be a crime related with this issue. What we do, we try to control the announcements at the internet, and as I said, sometimes we must fill forms, and we try with our powers to detect the situations and the irregularities. If the announcement is non-discrimination, if it has all the requires related to the working conditions, and this we can do. When it's necessary to investigate more, it's difficult for us, but it's a challenge challenge for us because we have recruitment at the social media and on the Facebook, and I think it's necessary to reinforce our powers or reinforce our cooperation with the police in order to can control these aspects. Related with the pandemic and teleworking, it's a challenge also because sometimes we have an enterprise. We don't know where the enterprise is, and then a workplace in another country, and it's very difficult to define what law applies, as Daryl said, to these kind of situations. It's a challenge for us. Can control this, yes, but it's what we must do, and we must develop cooperation with other entities in order to control these kind of situations.
Thank you, Teresa. Just to follow up on that, I think it's a question from Jorge, and it's about countries of destination and whether legal aid mechanisms are in place for migrant workers. Is there any example from any of the panelists or Teresa yourself in terms of where countries of destination, whether those kind of services are provided to migrant workers that find themselves in exploitative situations?
In Portugal, we have some bilateral agreements or because we are a sending country. Some Portuguese workers goes to the Central Europe, to France, Belgium, Netherlands, so Spain also. And in this kind of situation, we have cooperation with the European countries through a platform that it's IMI, an internal market system, that all the countries of the European Union are there. And if you want, we can ask any question to our colleagues in another country and we exchange information. It's very useful that we have these platforms. And in this case, Portugal is a sending country. We don't receive many workers from European Union. We receive we receive many workers of third countries. In this case, we have protocols with countries that speak Portuguese language. And we have also, we are negotiating other protocols with another countries that are sending workers to Portugal. And what we have in mind is simplify process, provide information and develop this kind of information about workers' rights and have focal points in order to circulate this kind of information.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to go over and ask a question of Edith now, because she's been silent so far. And it's again from Sadia in Pakistan. And I think this is a significant question, which centers around this issue of corruption. And she says, corruption is one of the major challenges in implementation and enforcement. Any suggestions on this? Edith?
Thank you so much. What we have done as a country is that we have made all our processes to be online to minimize interactions between bodies so that all the applications are uploaded online. The certificates are also given online. And we've minimized interactions between the applicants and the officers. So that has helped us to minimize on corruption. And also, we work also very closely with the agencies that deal with enforcement. So in case of that, of course, corruption is a big challenge. And you also know that it is vicious and it can also fight back. But most that you can do is to help to minimize it. And that's what we've been working on. And we also encourage citizens to report any form of corruptions. And you can also find also on our website, you can report a corruption case. within the building, we have boxes for corruption, and it's the agency that deals with corruption and my office that have the key to that box. So that has helped to minimize on issues of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. It's good to see also that digital platforms are being used as well to have more transparency and to minimize corruption. I wonder if there are any other panelists that would like to share some thoughts about this, because this has been an eternal issue, this issue of corruption. Perhaps, Daryl, would you have some perspective on this?
The thing that I would add is that when we started out, before we got involved in the work that we've progressed with Europol and the network with other labour inspectorates in the EU, it took quite some time to make those links with those individuals. And obviously, when you meet them at other meetings, that encourages and provides you with greater assurance. Particularly, I think it was easier where we are dealing with other EU countries and therefore similar frameworks that we're all working to at the time. The issues for the UK may be quite different in the future, particularly in the agricultural sector, where the National Farmers Union and others have been concerned that we won't have the right level of migrant workers and others to actually support that industry, and therefore the need to look at other seasonal workers schemes and where workers may be allowed to come from, and where those workers may come from countries that we have not historically had close relationships with. We will be going through quite a complicated process, I guess, as those countries come forward, to identify who the business is that's recruiting the workers in the source countries, how they are regulated in that source country, and are there any issues of concern in terms of the information that we then get back as to whether there may be some corruption or irregularities that might undermine the information we receive and the way that those businesses operate, which can increase the risk of exploitation for the workers.
Thank you, Daryl. I have a follow-up question, perhaps for Matt, on this. We've been talking corruption now, but we have also with COVID seen quite a bit of racism. It was there before as well, racism and prejudice within institutions and law enforcement, especially in destination countries. Sorry, this is a question from Elisa. So she's asking about, this issue of racism and prejudice within institutions and law enforcement in destination countries being a challenge, especially where migrant workers do not have access to unions or collective bargaining. So are there any discussions happening on the potential of mandating sensitivity anti-racism trainings within relevant institutions, or any other thoughts you have on this, Matt?
Just a brief thought on that. I think one thing that the TUC has been pushing for and campaigning for is to make sure that the inspectorates and the people who work for the labour market enforcement bodies are much more diverse and representative than they are at the moment. So making sure that the inspectors represent the workers who are making complaints. And I think that's particularly important because people who are making complaints want to make sure that they feel comfortable making those complaints, and that the people who are dealing with those complaints have an understanding of the sort of issues that they're facing in the workplace. So I think the question was saying that young black women face a lot more discrimination and harassment and racism in the workplace. I think it would be important that we have a lot more diverse people in the labour market inspectorate so they can understand those issues and help workers with complaints.
Thank you, Matt. Let me hand over to my co-moderator, Celine here. Celine, I don't know if you've also seen some of the questions come in, or perhaps you have some of your own. We don't have much time left, but certainly maybe we can finish the last question with you if you have one to ask either the panelists. Over to you, Celine.
Yes, thank you. I've seen perhaps one additional question. It's from Neil, who's in London. He mentions that, understandably, there are some fake job offers and fake adverts and contracts for job abroad that are often an issue. And that unfortunately only gets discovered once the workers have arrived in the country of destination. So could you perhaps, one of you, give your views on how do you address this important issue? Perhaps Daryl or Teresa?
And thanks for the question, Neil. I think the issue for me, as I pointed out earlier, is the difficulty that online platforms can create. So we've obviously looked at how we might be able to tackle those in the UK. There's some more work that needs to be done on that. But if workers are being recruited by online platforms outside the UK, we might not know about their exploitation until they get to the UK. Do they report it to us? Do they report it to authorities in the source country? The ongoing work that we've done with Europol has tried to look at some of these issues and therefore that greater connectivity across borders to try and be able to tackle those sorts of issues. One of the powers that we have for our criminal investigations is the ability to track telecommunications between phone numbers that might be suspect. We can, in some circumstances, look at internet service provider details as well. And so, therefore, one of the problems I think that faces labour inspectorates is the extent to which they need additional investigative powers to get access to information that can more effectively track where these online platforms are being based, and to make sure that there is the cross-border collaboration between the country where the workers come from that's been exploited with the country where they may be exploited, as well as potentially a third country where the online platform may be actually be operated from.
Thank you very much. Perhaps very quickly, Teresa, do you have a view on that?
So what we do in that situation is try to see all kinds of rights that the worker has. He has the right to receive the wage, he has the right to social protection, and he has a set of rights that are in the labor legislation. And what we do is try to solve that situation and makes that the employer in that situation can comply with the law and pay to the worker all the rights that he have, and also the social protection. If there are some crimes here involved, we can communicate to the police and other institutions in order to investigate the situation. And if it is a country that we have a protocol, we can develop the proceedings. When we are speaking about agencies, when the employer doesn't pay, they have the obligation to pay the worker, and if it is necessary, to ensure the repatriation. And we inform the worker because there are some ONGs and some networks and organizations that give support to this kind of workers in order to protect them and protect the situation. In brief words, we control the companies of all the rights that they have. We communicate to other entities the situations, the infractions that they are in their competencies, and we inform the worker where he can obtain another work or social protection or a kind of situation in order to resolve the situation.
Thank you very much. So we have a lot of very interesting and pertinent questions, but unfortunately we only have 2 minutes left. So I will give the final question from Ghulam, and we'll ask each of the panelists to please respond in perhaps just 30 seconds. How do you see the cooperation between the countries to eliminate unethical recruitment practices? So can we start with you, Matt?
I think there's more that the TUC could be doing to speak to our union federations across Europe to raise awareness of some of these poor practices. For example, job adverts we've heard about, which aren't actually for proper real jobs. And so we can raise awareness from the worker representative side and try and flag up with union members and workers across different European countries where the risks are for them.
Thank you very much. Teresa, a few words on your thoughts on the cooperation between countries?
It's necessary to understand the flux of the migration and reinforce the protocols, reinforce the exchange of information, have concrete plans if it is possible in order to develop some kind of measures related with information, related with guidance to this kind of works, and reinforce cooperation. I think it is very important, namely with digital platforms or networks. It's necessary to reinforce the network.
Thank you. Edith, a few words?
Thank you. What we need is we need a national cooperation to be able to deal with an ethical recruitment. We also need regional cooperation so that because what we've realized that you can work on an ethical by training even the PEs, but if you do not have a regional cooperation, then your efforts you'll not be able to realize these efforts. And of course, to have it globally, we need to work in close partnership so that we will be able to do away with an ethical recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Daryl.
Yeah, so the recruitment process can be quite a problem in terms of exploitation of workers in two ways. Firstly, the supply chain of workers from a source country to a destination country, where we need to tackle it and work with our partners in the source countries, as I've mentioned. But also we'll have situations where, for example, the workers in a source country are, say, for example, working in the agricultural sector in a different country, where they're being exploited, where the product of that exploitation is coming to the UK. Good example, salads. And so what we don't want to do is continue to receive tainted goods from workers that are being exploited in other countries. So it is so you need national regulatory authorities to operate in the same way, so that they're tackling the problem, whether it's the supply of a product that's tainted or the supply of workers, and to cooperate on trying to build towards common standards to protect those workers. We've been doing that work directly with the labour inspectorates in the EU through the Europol, with some of the work we've been doing on fair recruitment and some of the training as a comparator with the ILO, and more recently also with some of the work with the IOM in terms of the developing global policy network. And I think it's important that not only do we have those direct bilateral collaborations with other inspectorates on cases where we're dealing with exploitation, but we also try and work together towards better best practice understanding to develop as much as possible a common approach to protect the workers, whether they're coming to a destination country or whether they're actually in a different country, but we can help by trying to prevent that exploitation and building up a common standard approach.
Thank you very much, Daryl, Teresa, Edith, and Matt. Thank you for being here and for sharing your experiences and your challenges and your thoughts. And yes, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let me join Celine in thanking the panelists, but also very importantly, the audience here today. You really posed some really fundamental questions, and also even those big sound words in the poll in the beginning really helped shape this discussion and helped our speakers. So I'd really like to also thank the audience for your excellent participation and superb questions. And I hope you got a lot out of this. We had a very rich panel and a lot of insight. So thank you so much. And thank you to my co-moderator, Celine, as well, and to the organizers.
Thank you. Bye.